before we get started, class, I want you to meet some of my colleagues who are some of the best industry experts that we could hire.
Hotel management program, along with the class that Professor Wright teaches, which is the HMD 101. I also teach the housekeeping class. So for those of you who are hotel majors, you will have to see me in my classroom. Welcome.
My name is Mark DeStefano. I'm the director of the casino management program here at the college. I've been with the college since 2006. I teach all of the casino management classes, surveillance, the marketing class, intro class. So if you're interested in going from hospitality or hotel to a casino side, you would see me in some of your classes. Welcome.
My name is Andrew Fanese. I'm in the food and beverage management program, and I teach things like sanitation, purchasing, catering management. I'm the resident alcoholic, so I teach bartending, liquor bar management, and restaurant management.
Class, you are looking or have been introduced to real subject matter experts, not only the hospitality, not only the academic side, but the operational side. Mr. Phil Pedotti, he 1999 graduated from the University of Tulsa Law School, started with enforcement division of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, worked 17 years for the Gaming Control Board and retired last fall as a special agent. I know that for a fact because I saw his badge. He began, and we're so lucky to have him, he began as a full-time instructor with CSN in the casino management program. So without any further ado, Mr. Pedotti is going to make the formal introduction of our speaker. Give him a hand, please.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. It is also my pleasure to introduce Mr. Peter Barnhart. He has represented prominent Nevada businesses and individuals since 1976. In 2001, he was appointed to the Nevada Gaming Commission as the chairman and was subsequently reappointed 3 extra times to be the longest-running chairman for the Nevada Gaming Commission until 2014. While chairman, he oversaw a lot of changes in the gaming industry, whether it be the combined licenses for the MGM and Mandalay Bay properties, the combined licenses for Harrah's and the Caesars properties. But one thing that really took hold during his tenure was the step towards technology. Okay, the technology that's available in the casino and the hotel businesses now is astronomical compared to what it was even 17 years ago when I started. The server-based gaming, where they can control the machines from the back room, the mobile gaming, where you can play games on your tablet, and obviously the online gaming, where you can play from home, is a huge undertaking for this state, and we were the forerunner at getting all of this regulated and approved in the nation. He has numerous accomplishments while being here in Nevada since 1976. They were so numerous, I asked him, I said, do you want me to just start listing these all out? But they are numerous, let me tell you. Again, I wanted to welcome our speaker, Mr. Peter Barnhart, and thank you.
I'm going to try to give you a brief rundown of kind of what Nevada gaming regulation is all about, but I'll try to get through a lot of this to give you some idea of what we in Nevada did and built as a regulatory structure, how important that is, and some of the key concepts that make gaming regulation in Nevada the model that's used throughout the world for effective regulation. As many of you know, a gaming license is a very, very valuable asset. But unlike many assets, it can't be sold. You can't sell a gaming license, but you can lose it. From the gaming perspective, a license is valuable only insofar as it's in good standing. If you lose it, then you have no value whatsoever. Not only will you be deprived of operating what can be a lucrative business in the state of Nevada, you will also be barred, in effect, from running, working in, owning a gaming establishment anywhere in the world. So the license itself is extremely valuable. And anybody that wants to work in the gaming industry has to understand a few of these concepts. If you, as a hospitality employee, as a gaming employee, do something that affects the viability of a company's gaming license, well, that's a pretty serious offense, and you can cause tremendous problems. So you have to get an education. Professor Wright and I go way back. We were both young, spry, quick, fast, great basketball player. I was a point guard. He was the big man in the middle and the big, strong rebounder. But we have a history in Nevada together for 50 years. And we've seen the industry grow and change over that period of time, I think, for the better. It's a much more vibrant place now. The influence of bad people, organized crime, syndicates is gone. A gaming license is so valuable that today's licensees don't have any incentive to cheat the public, to skim money off the top, because the license itself is worth so much more than what little bit of money, relatively, you could skim out of a slot machine operation and take out the back door. So those days are long gone, at least in part because of the conscientious work that the regulators have done and the licensees have done to make sure they comply with Nevada gaming. We're going to talk about how important compliance with regulation is to the gaming industry. It can make or break a casino resort. We'll go through a few of the basics of the structure of our organization. Then I'll go through an example of a regulatory crisis that almost resulted in the loss of a license by a major Nevada operator. So, important things about Nevada gaming regulation. Our legislature has said that the continued growth and success of gaming is dependent upon public confidence and trust. Vital. The public has to understand they're being treated fairly if they go to our casinos to partake of that activity. Gaming must be free from criminal and corruptive elements. Nothing worse than feeling as if you got cheated at a game. So you've got to, as a primary function of the state regulation, make sure gaming is honest, competitive, free from criminal and corruptive elements. And how do we implement that? First, disclosures. Any licensee, anyone who wants to become a licensee, has to really open up his or her life, not just for the last couple years, your entire life. Not unusual for our investigators to go back to high school. Want to know everywhere you've lived since high school, every job you've had since high school, reasons for changing jobs, every dime in your bank account has to be justified. Did it come from legitimate operations? If you've never had a job, never paid taxes, never got a W-2 form, but you have several $1 million in the bank, that's going to raise questions. Where did that money come from? So, disclosure, vital. And all of that is done up front. Nevada does not come back every year and examine your suitability to make sure you're still okay. Nevada looks up front at your background and then trusts that you are going to follow and obey the law after that point, so you don't have to go back in, but if you do something wrong, you can be thrown out of the industry. Second basic component, self-reporting. Thank you. We as gaming regulators cannot do our jobs if we had to have a license or an agent in every licensed location. Just can't do it. Too many locations, too many casinos, too many games being played. So casinos typically have a very strong self-reporting policy that requires employees to report up the management chain anytime they see a violation or a potential violation of any gaming regulation. The Gaming Control Board and the Gaming Commission typically treat people much, much more leniently if they have self-reported a violation. If the gaming agents go out and find a violation that a casino has known about and is kept from our attention, that licensee will not be treated as favorably. And then finally, compliance. There has to be a commitment within the industry to complying with gaming regulations. And that has to be done on many levels, and we'll go through some of that. We've cited the statute here, and NRS is the gaming statute primarily involved with gaming, Chapter 463. And it requires for a person who's qualified to be licensed to have good character, honesty, and integrity, and prior activities, reputation, habits, and associations do not pose a threat to the public interest. That's why if you've been convicted of a crime, especially a crime involving integrity, stealing from an employer, that kind of thing, then there would be a threat to the public interest, especially with the gaming industry and how much cash actually is handled. You also have to have adequate business probity. You have to understand the business regulations, and you have to have adequate financing from a suitable source. That's why I say every dime has to be traced to make sure it's from a suitable source. And finally, compliance. Management has to buy into it. The upper levels of management have to enforce compliance plans and make sure that everybody in the operation understands that. It has to be training. It has to be a conscientious and educated workforce and a proactive compliance and accountability function. So many, in fact, all of the major licensees in Nevada have compliance plans that require their employees to submit reports anytime they see something suspicious going on. And they're protected from being fired or disciplined. They have to have a channel to pass on complaints about questionable activity all the way up to the supervisors, all the way to the board of directors, management of the company. And the goal, of course, what you want, violation-free operations. As I said a minute ago, a violation in Nevada can destroy a company or an individual who wants to be licensed in any jurisdiction involving gaming. So here's what we're looked at as regulators by many in the industry. We're the ogres. We're the ones that come in and tell people what they can't do. We're the ones who impose punishment and discipline. And many licensees will say, well, let's get rid of gaming regulation. Let us run our business the way other businesses do. Make our decisions based on what's good for the market. Why should we have to comply with all these regulations? Well, as I said, the goal is to make sure that Nevada retains its position of integrity, reputation, strict but fair regulation, so that people and the public know they're being treated fairly when they go into the casino to gamble in a game. All right, so how do the casinos get there? They have a compliance plan that's in writing, and it requires a review of all the business activities of the operator. There has to be a responsible person. The committee has to be made up of people that are independent in some respects from management of the company, and they have to file reports with the Gaming Control Board on what their compliance committee is doing. They have to look at any material transaction. It can be a purchase, it can be a financing, new loans. Officers, directors, key employees, consultants, and lobbyists all have to be reviewed to make sure their background is suitable for the casino operations. Substantial owners have to be investigated. Any material litigation has to be examined. And if there are any acts of wrongdoing by the company, by executives or employees, those have to be reported as part of the regular compliance function. As I said, major purchases, sales, and leases, who the licensee does business with. Some of the sadder chapters in Nevada gaming was where there were some suppliers of things like sheets and linens who were paying kickbacks to some of the gaming company employees, and therefore getting into business that way. It's a very common thing that you don't have cheating on the gaming floor, but you have cheating by outsiders trying to get more business, willing to pay people within the company to favor that company. You look at the tenants, the lessees of properties. All the casinos have different restaurant or clothing, drugstore, other retailers, jewelry stores. Again, you can have situations, and we have had situations in the past, where a lessee had organized crime ties and was influencing casino operations. in skimming money out of a slot machine racket and ended up having a real problem. So we now have the power to investigate and do investigate and require our licensees to investigate licensees or lessees of the licensee. Okay, you're also required in your casino to have a procedure set up where you can respond to actions requested by regulators. Obviously, if a regulator asks a question, you better answer it. They wouldn't ask it unless they had some concern. So if there are any regulatory violations, those have to be dealt with. Okay, once you have a plan, you implement the plan. You're required to have meetings, agendas, minutes, report on action items, examine conflicts of interest. Companies have to have a code of ethics, chain of command for reporting, review material contracts and hires, and make sure all the departments in the property are complying as well. So, all of that quick introduction into what is important. Let's talk about a case we had, now it's been many years ago, but it illustrates a lot of the points we're talking about of how casinos are regulated, what the risks are, and how company decisions can have dramatic effects on an operation. So the goals in the compliance process that we're talking about, we have the goals for any licensee is to protect the company, protect that gaming license, adopt and follow procedures. There's no guarantee that any compliance plan is going to avoid problems, but good procedures will minimize the risks of having something go wrong. Regulation 5 of our gaming regulations deals with protecting the public health, safety, morals, good order, and general welfare of Nevada gaming operations. So again, if any of you take a look at that, can somebody tell me what good order and general welfare is? What are good morals? Very difficult, very subjective. There are no hard and fast rules that one particular action will be good morals and another one would be bad and result in the licensee being disciplined. We have these adopted in our regulation that we enforce. If we think something is not of good morals, we can take disciplinary action. And what does that mean? We could revoke a gaming license, shut down a gaming casino, because we think the conduct of the hotel, the casino, or an individual in the licensed location was of bad morals. That is very difficult to have an objective test to see what is or is not correct. Advertising is an area that comes up very frequently. Casinos like to advertise to bring customers into the facility to gamble, to eat, to partake of the entertainment. So some ways you can get more and more people to come in is with having advertising that makes your property look very desirable. And the Hard Rock, as many of you know, considers itself on the edge. It's a property that prides itself on having new, different, exciting things happening. And its advertising typically goes a little bit more extreme than what you see at some of the more traditional properties. What they have to do in looking at their advertising programs, determine whether or not it violates their compliance policy. Does it violate the standards of decency? Does it present a problem of the morals or the character of the location? Is advertising in bad taste? Is it undignified or offensive, dishonest, false, or misleading? Again, all of these are subjective comments, subjective standards, without a whole lot of guidance on what is or is not, even dishonest, false, or misleading. So here's one of the billboards that Hard Rock used in its advertising campaign, in its attempt to be edgy. And this was a billboard that appeared on Paradise Road on the way to the airport, right by the Hard Rock. And there's a caption that you probably can't read on the billboard which said, "There's always a temptation to cheat." Now, when the Hard Rock put the billboard up, it was part of their edgy advertising campaign that they wanted to attract people to the facility. Well, the Gaming Control Board saw this and thought, this violates the morals of our community, and we don't think this should be part of a publicly available advertisement. It crosses the line and subjects the Hard Rock to discipline. So the board filed a complaint and said, we think the Hard Rock should lose its gaming license. because its advertising has gone beyond the edge, over the top, to be a violation. Now, what did they say in defense? What did the Hard Rock say? Well, sure, there's double meaning here. You can cheat on a spouse or a significant other, or you can cheat at gaming. And we're not saying that you can come to the Hard Rock and cheat at gaming. We're not even saying you can cheat on a spouse at the Hard Rock. All we're saying is it's kind of an exciting place to be. Fun things happen, so come on over and partake at our hotel. The control board said, wait a minute, there are some gaming violations in this billboard. Are you allowed to bite a card if you're playing cards? How many of you saw that she's biting a card? That's a typical way people get an advantage in gaming. If they can mark a card, they know what's coming up, they can cheat. Gaming Control Board said, you advocate a player putting a card in his or her mouth? Well, that opens the door for cheating. What about sprawling over a gaming table? Is that allowed? No. What about having chips scattered willy-nilly on a gaming table? Gaming Control Board said, no. Too easy for people to grab chips and cheat unless you have the dealers keeping control over that. So we think this ad advocates marking cards, having disarray on the table, and letting the casino be vulnerable to cheating, and maybe the casino itself could be cheating. So Control Board said, we don't think you're fit or suitable to hold a gaming license in Nevada. So the Hard Rock had some other ads that it put up on billboards. This one was up in the same general area during the National Finals Rodeo a few years ago, and was characterized or attempted to meet the market for a country western type person attending the rodeo. And it says, get ready to buck all night, and there's a picture of a lady, looks like panties down around ankles. And the Hard Rock said, look, nobody takes this seriously. There's no profanity. If you're reading something into this, that's your fault, not ours. We're just trying to attract attention and get people from the rodeo to come visit our hotel. Gaming Control Board says, well, no, we think that this may be advocating what? Prostitution. Prostitution is illegal. No indication there that that's husband, wife, just having a good time at the Hard Rock. So the argument was, you're advocating breaking the law on prostitution. So again, we're going to take away your gaming license. Hard Rock is pretty upset. So the Hard Rock put up a new billboard, and they said, this is another clean and inoffensive billboard from your friends at the Hard Rock. There's a pussycat, a beaver, and bunny rabbits, cartoonish characters. So the Hard Rock was saying, come on, this is Nevada, this is Las Vegas. What are you prudes at the Gaming Control Board thinking about in trying to shut us down because we're trying to have a little bit of fun with our advertising? Control Board did not like this billboard, even more so than the other two. This was the first time in my experience, and it's never happened since, the licensee openly flaunted the Gaming Control Board and said, we think you're stupid. We'll put cartoon characters up here, which incidentally have a double meaning as well, but we're going to call this a clean and inoffensive billboard if that's what you want. So what happens once the Control Board gets its anger up over a licensee, wants to revoke the license? They file a complaint. And the complaint says, we think this is unsuitable, violation of the public morals of Nevada, and we therefore think the license should be revoked. Those complaints come before the Nevada Gaming Commission, which is a separate regulatory body that rules on what the Control Board is alleging. So the Control Board acts like a prosecutor. The police and the district attorney's office in a criminal case prosecutes a case. The defendant, the Hard Rock, defends it. And then the commission holds a hearing where you have witnesses testify, evidence presented on whether or not the allegations of this complaint represent a violation of Nevada gaming and therefore should result in a penalty to the Hard Rock. So you're the Hard Rock. What kind of defenses do you raise here? Besides the fact it's silly, we had advertising that was, yeah, it was edgy, but it wasn't pornographic, it wasn't illegal, it wasn't misleading. It didn't say you can come to the Hard Rock and we're going to set a slot machine to give you a payoff every time you play, something like that. Hard Rock also said, wait a minute, we have in this country something called the First Amendment, the right of free speech. And we're entitled to say what we want to say, and we can't be punished for the content of what we say. And there's plenty of law that establishes that commercial speech like this is entitled to some First Amendment protection. So the Gaming Control Board had to fight, why is it that we can silence a licensee when the licensee wants to express itself? So the question then became, well, is the standard that we mentioned earlier, good morals, general public welfare, is that something that is specific enough to give a licensee due warning that if you put up some billboards that have double meanings, you could have your license revoked? Is it sufficient notice? There's the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, talks about due process of law. And can a state deprive the Hard Rock of its gaming license based on vague general standards? So how do you resolve this? Well, we had at the hearing an entire hearing room filled with members of the public, many mothers with babies in strollers saying, we think this is terrible. These ads should not be allowed by a gaming property. You know, it's one thing if you're listening to the radio and you want to keep your kids protected from Howard Stern or radio shows that have some topics you don't want your kids to hear, but you can't turn off a billboard. If you're driving to the airport, you have to see this. And kids say, you know, Mommy, what does it mean? There's always a temptation to cheat. Why is that lady lying on a table without clothes on? So we had members of the community come up, testify, we think this is bad for the morals of Las Vegas. We had the American Civil Liberties Union on the other side saying, wait a minute, this is a serious constitutional question. Is there a due process violation? Is there a First Amendment violation? And either way, we think your regulations are too vague, too imprecise. We're going to go ahead and have them overturned in court. So that was the battle line that was drawn. So the First Amendment we talked about versus the creativity of the advertising, the subjective tests, and the vague standards to govern conduct. So let me just take a show of hands. How many of you think the Hard Rock's license should be revoked because of this conduct that we've described? And how many of you think Hard Rock should be given freedom to have a creative advertising campaign without state interference? Okay, well, we have more votes in favor of the Hard Rock than we do against the Hard Rock. So we had some issues to consider at the hearing. One of them, which I didn't mention, was some previous regulatory concerns. The Hard Rock had been running before these billboards an advertising campaign, typical you see, play our slot machines and win a car. And they had a big Corvette up on display in the slot machine bank, and they were getting people to come in and play the machines hoping to win a Corvette. Well, it turns out that the odds of winning the Corvette were so high. As a practical matter, it's like winning Powerball lottery. There was no way that car would ever be won, given the combinations required to be hit for a win to register. So the Gaming Control Board went to the Hard Rock at that time and said, you know, you really can't make that kind of a promotion if there's no chance of the public winning. It's not fair. So the Hard Rock said, okay, fine. We will stop that. We will make sure that if we do any promotions like that in-house, we'll go ahead and make sure they're fair, reasonable, viable, where there can be a winner. And they said, we will run any of these promotions by our compliance committee to give you, the regulators, some extra comfort that we won't put an unfair, misleading promotion on the floor in our casino without making sure our compliance committee independently reviews it. Did the Hard Rock take the billboards to the compliance committee? No, they did not. Gaming Control Board said, your failure to follow through with what you promised to do is a new violation, which shows you're disregarding gaming requirements, and we're going to take your license away for that. Hard Rock said, well, wait a minute. We promised if we had an in-house promotion like play the slots, win a car, we'd run it by our compliance committee. We never told you we would run outdoor advertising before the compliance committee. Well, the board again felt that's distinction without a difference. You had to follow those procedures. You didn't do it, that's a violation. So what happened ultimately? There was a settlement. Hard Rock and the board agreed. The Hard Rock would pay a fine. It was $1 million fine, a big fine. The board would remove its claim that the license should be revoked, and they would reaffirm that their compliance committee would look at all advertising, whether it be print advertising, billboards, in-house promotions. The Gaming Control Board accepted that, not so much because it felt the Hard Rock conduct and the Hard Rock advertising campaign on the billboard was proper or okay, but the board was concerned that if, in fact, the First Amendment or the 14th Amendment violations were found by a court to be valid, regulations were too vague, too uncertain for anybody to know what would be a violation. The board felt their entire regulatory scheme might be thrown out by a court. And in effect, Nevada would be unregulated because its standards were too vague to be enforced. And that was a risk the board didn't want to take. So the board was willing to compromise with the Hard Rock. Okay, now go back to where we are, what the regulators are trying to achieve through these compliance procedures. Are the internal controls adequate? Is implementation effective? Is information collected and distributed appropriately? Hard Rock fell short on all of those factors in this particular case. Their internal controls did not evaluate whether or not the advertising campaign was too risque or violation of Nevada's morals. Before the billboards went up, they didn't implement their compliance plan, and they didn't distribute the information appropriately to upper level management so they could be sure that management was in control and not the advertising department. So typically, what we see on the regulatory side, there would be insufficient documentation that particular decisions have been reviewed before implementation. And then there might be company-specific items that aren't addressed. So it's nothing wrong with being edgy, with the Hard Rock being an edgy property, trying to appeal to a certain level of customer. But there should be ways to cover that to protect the public so the regulators are comfortable that whatever compliance activities are being followed have specific relevance to that location. We also see compliance officers or committees that aren't sufficiently independent. So you have management that says, we want an edgy advertising campaign. What employee is going to say no? If you don't have some level of independence to report violations or potential violations, then the compliance plan falls short. A lack of independent investigation is another common problem we see. Your rubber stamp management. Now, if you're working, for example, at Wynn Resorts and Steve Wynn orders you to do something and you think it's wrong, it's going to be hard to say no. But there has to be a system in place for you as an employee to complain to someone to try to get redress so you don't commit illegal acts just because the boss tells you to do so. So again, the goal of Nevada's regulators is not to catch people, to play gotcha and punish them for regulatory violations. And effective compliance is better for the bottom line of the property. You do find the potential for wrongdoing, and you are able to set up systems and controls to make sure it doesn't actually happen before there is some kind of a loss to the company. If there are repeated violations or egregious noncompliance, then there can be further complaints and discipline. Just one other example of one that came before me on the commission involved another property that held a car giveaway contest. They brought in all their high rollers from all over the country, and the end of the weekend junket, there was going to be a raffle, a drawing for a brand new Mercedes. They had one of their particular high roller gamblers who'd come to town as part of that junket, had lost tremendous amounts of money at the tables over the course of the weekend. The host who brought that particular customer in felt bad for his customer and figured there was some way he had to make it up to him. So he rigged the raffle drawing. And the winning ticket was pulled, and sure enough, it's the high roller who had lost a ton of money during the weekend. No one would have known about this except one of the other employees at the raffle reported it under the compliance procedures. Upper level officials at the company reported it to the Gaming Control Board. At that time, management did a complete investigation to see how high up that particular cheating had gone. Did somebody approve it in advance? And all the evidence came out, confirmed by the board. It was the one rogue employee trying to make his customer feel better, and he rigged it. So on the commission, we again took the view that because the compliance process worked, because management took the initiative, investigated, we confirmed there was no evidence that the higher-ups at the property were involved. So we decided that that was still a violation. We fined this property several $100,000, but did not take action. The response of the licensee, the response of the business, can be very, very favorable in mitigating punishment. Okay, ran through it quickly.
Senator Keith Hoffer, back in the day, Senator Keith Hoffer was looking at running for the President of the United States. And one of his goals was to try and close down Las Vegas, or threaten to close Vegas because it was unsavory. And as we talked in this class, a lot of the gaming at the very beginning, back in 1932, we had a lot of bad habits. Which had come from the proliferation of people that were in organized crime, said, hey, fellas, let's go to Vegas. It's legal, but they brought bad habits with them. And some of those bad habits was one of the things, or some of the things that Senator Keith Hoffer talked about. And so that said, we needed a regulation committee. We needed a gaming control board. Mr. Bernhardt and the commission and their agents are very serious about regulations. They will not play games, and as Mr. Bernhardt said at the very beginning, the license is so valuable. Why play games? And so you hear the fines, $200,000, $1 million. Some of the, I would say, now you correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the bigger fines were under your jurisdiction, and it was for a reason. If you want to.
Sure. You're right. The largest fine that we imposed was on the Mirage, Bellagio, where there are requirements that what are called CTRs, currency transaction reports, have to be filed. anytime there is transactions of $10,000 or more in cash during a single calendar day. And that's part of the federal government's requirements to fight money laundering, drug trafficking, a lot of cash there that has to be laundered and turned into clean money. So the Bellagio had procedures for making sure those CTRs were filed. Well, their employee did not file them. Everyone did everything right until they sent it to the person charged with cataloging and sending the CTRs to the federal government. He got overwhelmed with his job. There were so many of these documents. They piled up in his office. He had boxes and boxes of CTRs dating back several years that had not been submitted. Now, our view of that was an incredibly serious violation, not just because the employee was not able to do his job, but the employer did not give the employee adequate support, and the employer did not have internal auditing procedures set up to confirm that CTRs had been sent to the federal government. So we ended up fining Bellagio, I think it was $5 million for that. A lot of people felt that was a pretty minor violation for that kind of a fine. But if you don't submit required reports to the federal government says the gaming industry can't control itself, we're going to shut it down. The entire industry could have been shut down because that one employee was overwhelmed.
Well, you know, there are many anecdotes that Mr. Bernhardt can talk to us about. I know a lot of our students have to go to another class. Again, give Mr. Bernhardt a big hand. And I want to say this, to get Mr. Bernhardt to come out and speak to you, he has a very busy schedule. So I am just so grateful for you coming by and remembering our 50 years of friendship. This gentleman is indirectly responsible for me, no, directly responsible for me graduating, being Coach Tarkanian's one of his first ball players to graduate on time. Now, how did he do that? Did he force me to go to class? No, he was my counselor in a program called Upward Bound. And we're about the same age, so, but he has a way. You see that smile on his face? I've seen him knock people down with that smile physically when we played sports. But he gave me the right directions to make sure that I got my degree on time by going to school as a junior and a senior in high school, taking college courses. And if it wasn't for him, someone telling me that this is going to pay off one day, I never would have graduated on time and one of Coach Tark's first ball players to graduate on time. So I want to thank you publicly for that. Those of you that are thinking about taking gaming classes, the gaming program is no joke. It is really just as serious, and they impart so many serious things about protection of the game, people cheating, dealers. I mean, it is very viable, and it's a program that we really need to bolster for this industry. So again, class, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you.